Hello, this is a re recording of a lecture I gave while I was in Japan on researching Japanese online using digital methods for research, why we do them, how we do them, and what is the goal of doing them. So I'm just going to give this lecture online so that people online can enjoy it as well, hopefully. And yeah, pretend you're there. You can ask questions in the comments after. So, yep, here we go. All right. Uh, my name is Wes Robertson, and I am a senior lecturer in Japanese sociolinguistics down here at Macquarie University in Sydney, Australia. I've done a lot of research to date on Japanese, almost a decade of being a full time academic. And this includes both traditional and more non traditional sort of research methods. My first book, Scripting Japan, for instance, and my early research on Japanese script was very much traditional. I was using written data, right? Comics as my main source of data. But as I've gone on, as I've done more and more research over the years, I've moved into other things. Like I have a paper on Ojisan gokko, which is when Japanese young women pretend to be lecherous Japanese men online, right, using that kind of online data. And I've also spent a lot of time with a blog that I run where I research Japanese slang, Japanese netspeak, various Japanese phenomenon that are really accessible primarily on the internet rather than in kind of day to day Japanese speech. And of course, when I'm not pretending to be a quality academic, I pretend to be an influencer by doing things on TikTok, YouTube, etc., where I make videos about the kind of things I talk about on my blog. But why do I do this and why have we kind of moved in this digital space? Well, to understand that, I think it's important to start by actually talking about the traditional approaches to studying Japanese, like what we were doing before the internet became a really important thing to study, as this sort of research still happens, and it still obviously is important. The internet is not the entirety of real life whatsoever. So, traditional approaches to studying language, studying Japanese, etc., traditionally use a number of techniques, and one, of course, is the interview. Now, interviews are still great, and they're one of the fundamental tools for language-based research, and will likely to continue to be so for some time. There's just some data you can really only get from long-form, deep, detailed interviews. My first book involves a lot of interviews. So does my second. Interviews are a key data point in both of these, and they do have negatives though because they're time-consuming. You have to set them up. They usually take like 30 minutes to an hour, sometimes 2 hours. You have to work through schedules. They're difficult to do in large numbers. If you want to interview 10 people or something like that, that's great. But if you want to interview 100, 1,000, that's going to take forever. They're expensive because you have to generally pay people for their time, or at least use your own time to set them up. And there's questions of who you can actually interview, right? Like if you want to interview a certain population, will they talk to you? The number of interviews that I've done is quite high. The number of interviews that I have been rejected, where people have said that they're not going to speak to me, is way higher than that. And is there undue pressure? Like, is there pressure? Is you as an academic talking to these people, and not just pressure in terms of like ethical issues, but also like, will they be honest to you? A common one is like if you want to talk to people that do something that's illegal, will they actually admit that to you? Will they talk to you? Will they be honest with you in these kind of contexts? Then is the survey, and the survey will likely also be a fundamental research tool for a long period of time in terms of getting people's attitudes towards language. There's a really great book called Kawaru Nihongo, sorry, Demo Kawaru Nai Nihongo, that came out a while ago, and that uses a bunch of NHK surveys to get information on how Japanese people feel about and use various Japanese vocabulary, etc. It's a really, really enjoyable read. I'd highly recommend it, and that's entirely based on surveys. But they also have negatives. One is that they're difficult to distribute. Like, say you have a population that you want to access, how are you actually going to access them? And how are you going to determine that's what it is? Like if you put the survey online and say, "Hey, I only want Japanese people to take the survey," can you guarantee that? Probably not. If it's a paper survey where you hand it out, are you going to get access to that place? Will people actually return it to you? And then, of course, you get what you get. So with an interview, you can say, "That's very interesting. Thank you for that. Can we expand on that?" With a survey, you can have open ended questions, although people do get tired of a long survey very, very quickly. But once the survey is handed back to you, unless you have set up where you can email and recontact these people, which is quite difficult to do with a survey, you will not be able to expand on the data. And if you find something very interesting in your data that you can't explain, you have to do an entire another survey to figure that out, or set up interviews. It takes time. There's also, of course, then media analysis. Now, this also is actually fairly new, relatively speaking. There was a time in linguistics where media was rejected for study because it's not real language. Unfortunately, we're well past that. But media analysis has been a major part of Japanese language research, especially, and become indeed one of the most important data sources we have, not for talking about how real people speak, but for understanding ideologies, uses of language, etc. There's, for instance, you can see references to kind of this academic vilification there. But as we move on, we found that it's become more and more important. What you're looking at here on the right is a draft of a chapter that I wrote for what should be an Oxford Handbook of Japanese coming out hopefully this year or next. But you note that there's a lot of research to date, but most of it though is kind of focused on a limited number of media forms, and that's kind of an issue of not only accessibility but also just the aging age of academics. Manga and TV, for instance, are very, very, very well studied, but things like uh, VTubers, things like YouTube, video games, these don't get as much study. And part of it's just because they're harder to get the data. Like you have to record it and transcribe it. In a video game, it's especially hard. But also just the age of the people that are done with a PhD and have established their research careers does kind of create this bias. So even within media being important, though, it should note that there has been an over focus on certain types of media. Now, fortunately, those media are very influential, manga, etc. But that's something we have to recognize as well. Indeed, media analysis was the first project I ever did. Like in my PhD thesis and my first real publications, I was looking at the use of script in manga, and it found some findings that were really interesting to me. I hope interesting to you listening to this. That I wouldn't have been able to find without it. Like what you're looking at now is the manga Usagi Doropu, or Bunny Drop in English, and I had one of my easiest to describe data sets from here, in that the script used for the first person pronouns by different characters in the comic changed. If they were an adult male, as you can see on the left, they would use either watashi, boku, or ore, but it would always be in kanji except for 15 counts. And those counts were all restricted to certain individuals in the comic. So it was very clear that the kanji was kind of indexing or marking a normative sort of adult identity, and then people who deviated that were assigned other pronouns. In contrast, teen males almost only used katakana, with the one kanji seeming to be sort of an error, a typo within the comic. But women characters, though, regardless of their behavior, basically only had hiragana for their first person pronouns. So while there were like male adults who were kind of bad characters and got katakana, the character you're looking at there on the left, Akari, is basically the closest thing the manga has to a villain, and her pronouns are still in hiragana, not katakana. So there was an ideology, kind of a belief that certain scripts here, kanji, katakana, were not appropriate for women's pronouns, which links to other beliefs about male and women language use throughout kind of the history of Japan. And more recently, I did a study which has passed peer review and hopefully will be out early this year, mid this year, looking at the translation of English vulgarities in The Boys and Russian Doll into Japanese. And this was also able to kind of highlight these sort of phenomenon. As if you look at this table, which is quite confusing, I know, but this shows how many instances of non-translation. So instances where the vulgarity was not translated into anything in the Japanese version, in the subtitles and the dubbing. There were in both series. And I should stress here that when I say non-translation, I mean nothing. Because I wanted to be very open about my data in this study, I considered any form, any piece of variation, any choice a potential translation. So if somebody says F you and it's translated as like ski janai ne, then that ne is still considered a variant because it's optional, whereas Skijinai would be considered non-translation of vulgarity because there's nothing there that marks any kind of identity or affect. So these numbers are actually lower than I think a lot of people would consider, because people don't consider ne a swear word. But anyway, explain my data. But as you can see in all this, in every single case, basically, more swearing is not translated in the women's speech every single time. So even in Russian Doll, where you can see that more swearing is being allowed to be translated, you still have a higher percentage in almost every category where women's swearing is not translated into anything in the translation, which is shedding light again on these beliefs about how men and women should use language in Japan, which don't necessarily reflect what's actually being said in the stories and the identities these characters are performing in the stories. Indeed, when you look at the actual translations, which again can be anything from kuso, etc., to just a ne attached to the end, you see that what is being used to quote unquote translate the women's vulgarity is often quite lower. For instance, in the boys, when the word ass is used in English, men often are translated as saying ketsu, which is a more vulgar term for the posterior. But women are not allowed to use that word in the translations at all. So even when you have statements like this, it was me, 23-year-old, bright-eyed, ass you could bounce a quarter off of me, where a woman is, in a semi-vulgar sense, making a very distinct and clear statement about their former attractiveness. That is translated in both the subs and the dubs as just being kind of young and bright-eyed, with no reference to a butt at all. Indeed, there's even a case where someone says a very vulgar comment regarding the butt in a sexual manner, and that's translated as oshiri in the Japanese as well. And indeed, you even found things. I even found things about particles that I thought were quite interesting. As in the boys, just the sentence final "da" is in like "skida," right? Something that actually is considered neutral is not allowed for women when they are swearing in the English text. And this may surprise people, but there are studies, decades of studies actually, that have looked at like letters to the editor and stuff and found people complaining about women ending their sentences with "da." So this idea that this is vulgar and the idea that women shouldn't do this is actually affecting the translation, whereas men are allowed to use "da" all the time. Yo, they, pretty similar. Women speak less in the boys, so we shouldn't be too, focused on the numbers there. But note that only men are using zo and zay, whereas women use no and wa, which are often considered, especially the like no-yo forms or wane, are considered to be part of like traditional women's speech in Japan, a social construct that is seen more in media than not. And that's being used to translate swearing, which is definitely alters kind of the identities these characters are performing. In Russian Doll, we do see women being allowed to use zo, etc. But again, we're not seeing men use forms like no at the end. But we are seeing them, they're allowed to use da, which I guess is nice. There's a little bit of that there. So, and oddly enough, for whatever reason, when men swear, they never use name. That's never considered as a potential translation, whereas it is being used in the women's subs and the women's dubs. And this shows again these traditional approaches still have interesting things. But what about online data sources, right? What's the point of that, and why do we want to pay attention to those things? And even more importantly, how do we do it effectively, given that we're just looking at a massive chunk of data, and a lot of it may be robots, right? So online data sources have what are called affordances, and that's something that's really key. Before you do any study that involves an online data source, you need to be very familiar with the affordances of the website that you're using. So all of these, for instance, when I did this live, I just asked people to tell me what they think some of the affordances of these are, but I'll just tell you. Most of you probably know better than I do, but something like Instagram, for instance, is very, very visual based, and it also has a very bad search function. If you can't search by date, you can't search comment text. So if you want to go out and find comments on something, if you want to go out and find a phenomenon, you kind of have to find the accounts and pay attention to those. Something like Facebook then has a lot of data and it's much more searchable in some ways, but it's also unethical to use Facebook for general research because you cannot access these things with a without an account. That's a big thing. Like people who post on Facebook have some expectation of privacy, so you need their permission to use any of their data whatsoever, and that makes it a very different website. A lot of people don't use it for research, for these reasons. If you want to go into a Facebook community and observe it and stuff like that, you need research ethics, as that's a private community, and you can't just go in there and watch them and take their data when they have an expectation of privacy. Something like Twitter is then okay. It's got a fairly strong search function, but it is collapsing. I'll show you some evidence of that in a while. But you also have, of course, the bot issue, et cetera. Are you getting real human data, and can you trust the search engine? Reddit is actually an excellent source for a lot of things because of the affordances, although the search engine is rather weak, famously. So you actually sometimes get better results going onto Google and restricting your searches to Reddit and then finding what you get. But it does have a lot of text, which is very, very useful. Although searching just for like something, like if you want to do a study on a specific word and searching for it, you're going to get a massive amount of data you're going to have to sift through. And if you use like a corpus thing that can download it all, that can be very, very effective. But you still have to deal with like, are you getting too much data to be useful? And then websites like 2channel, besides the fact that they don't exist anymore, you have the issue of the things being deleted. So excellent data, really, really interesting data for a very specific community, but it doesn't stay. And something like TikTok again has a bad search function. It's got a lot of people on it doing a lot of things. If we could somehow text search the speech of videos, it would be like a Library of Alexandria moment for research, but we can't. And also, you can't search by date. There's a button that says like go to oldest, and it doesn't work. As you spend time, like the before you do any project using one of these websites, you need to spend time on it, not just as a user, but as someone a researcher, to see what kind of data actually is available for you to do any kind of proper research here. And of course, once you've gone through ethics to collect that kind of data. There are also then considerations of like what search functionality, as I mentioned, is going to be on the service. How do you collect and code the data? And will you miss data doing this? Like, are you going to take screenshots? Are you going to copy just text? Are you going to trust a corpus machine to scrape it for you? Are you going to trust yourself not to miss anything? There's got to be some kind of consistent methodology that you do in order to make sure that when you present your data, it is what you actually say it is. Can you confirm the users are human? Does it matter? These are things you're going to have to pay attention to. Does the data you're looking for actually exist on the platform? I've had ideas for a number of studies that I thought would have been fascinating. I just couldn't find the data. Like I could not get enough hits of people using this on the platform, so the study didn't launch at all. And are you, again, violating research ethics? It is important, like, while it is okay to, generally speaking, use things that are publicly available without an account, is that still the best thing to do? And are there things you could do to make sure that that is not traceable back to the person that used it? A very common thing is, well, with Japanese data, you just translate it into English and then it's pretty much untraceable. But even with English data, make sure you anonymize who you get it from, and then also change the text around a bit when you present it so that people can't just Google that and find it. Those are kind of considerations that can be useful. So, for instance, something like Twitter. Generally speaking, people who post on Twitter don't expect things to be private. Back when I was using Twitter, I had some of my tweets just get posted on websites without anyone asking me, and that's fine. Like I have no problem with that. But some people might, right? And if they do find out that you've done that and they reach out to you, what's the best thing that how do you respond to that? Especially if it's not something you can delete. It's in a published paper, right? You have to consider these things. And that's very, very different from like a manga. Like you can use a manga's data without really asking anybody. If you want to reprint the pictures, that's maybe different. But these things are important. When you're working with humans, there is ethical considerations that go into there, and it depends on the website. However, there are benefits too. These websites can give you access to populations that might be nearly impossible to access otherwise, like VTuber fans. You can find a lot of them online in certain communities. Do these fans exist in real life? And are there a lot of them? Yes, but how do you find them off the internet? Do you just like go to the biggest station in your town and hold a sign saying, "I want to interview people that watch VTubers"? It's really tricky, but you can find them online very easily. Digital spaces are also obviously quite important to people's lives, so not attending to them is missing out on a huge part of human interaction. You have huge amounts of data, sometimes too much data, and forms of language use that don't exist elsewhere really can't be obtained elsewhere because you can't just walk around with a microphone hoping to pick up some slang and then use it for your blog, right? Like I did. And the kids love it, right? This is what the kids like. So we got to pay attention to what the kids like because the kids will be the adults and they will control society. And so we need to understand what's going on. So I've been doing a lot of again, research using these kind of online data methods, a lot of it casual, like on my blog, on TikTok, etc. Um, and I found things that are really important. Like for instance, Wikipedia says that this word, this kira kira nemu, started being used after 2010, but I found it on 2009. That was easy. It was great, right? You can find these things. You can check things online really easy, which is a benefit. There are also just websites like Google Books isn't very well maintained, but it's still quite functional and allows you to trace things back to 1994. You have websites from 1996, 1999 that just exist and are sitting there unmaintained, really, but still a piece of access. Whereas you can't go back to the 90s and interview people, but you can find things that they put on the internet, and that's a huge benefit that is something that only really exists in the digital. But there are difficulties. I mentioned, for instance, that Twitter has one of the best searches because you have all these functions. But the problem is you can't really trust the search function. As someone who's used it for a long time, I can say it's been getting worse and worse and worse as it's not really attended to. For instance, here's a tweet that went viral a long time ago that said, "My dog is sick." If you search for "my dog is sick" with 30,000 or more likes, it doesn't come up. So can you trust your data? In contrast, if you look for 10,000 likes, you get this post, which has 47,000 likes. But if you look for 50,000 likes, you do get the hippo post. So that's kind of confusing, right? That is a issue with your data. Can you trust the search engine? Do you need to trust the search engine? Do you need a total number of examples, or do you actually need to show like when things are happening for the first time? And do you have to hedge your language when you talk about these things? But let's move out of the abstract because talking about methods is important, but let's kind of show you how I have gone in and actually used digital methods in peer reviewed kind of research. So one study I mentioned was on Ojisan gokko, better known now as Ojisan kolbun, which is a practice where young women pretend to be old men and they post things like this. They message each other, pretending like they are these lecherous old men hitting on one another. So most acts are performed by a private messaging, and obviously, getting access to someone's line account, etc. It can be done. There is research where people have been like, "Hey, I'd like you to give me access to your messages or like share the screenshots with me," and people say, "Yeah, okay." But I was in Australia. That's a big problem for me with all my research. Like, what can I do? How can I learn more? How can I contribute to our understanding of Japan and the Japanese language while I'm not in Japan? At the time, Twitter's research search function was more reliable, though, which was very useful. And rather than just rely on it, though, what I did is basically every Friday I would set a parameter of last Friday to this Friday, and I would run like 6 different hashtags that I found that were used to share posts. Like people would take screenshots of their Ojisan Gokko and post it on Twitter and be like, "Hey, check out how funny my interaction was." So every week I just collected as much as I could, and I took screenshots and I coded them by date. And here's the full collection. Some of these have multiple interactions in them. I, zoomed out and coded like took as many screenshots as I could, and then I pumped them into uh, a software called in Vivo, and I started coding every single language feature to figure out what language elements make up this practice. So, for instance, you found things like this here. I would code it as katakana chan, and if it was in hiragana, hiragana chan, etc. This is something that I found was actually a major key part of the practice. Is using chan in katakana was part of how they produced this old man voice. As you can see, they're calling each other chan while pretending to be old men, so it actually comes off as like two old men hitting each other. But whatever, it's fine. It's good fun. Calling yourself Ojisan as like your first person pronoun, that was also like a key feature. You can see it being used in both interactions here. And also emoji and cow emoji were a key thing. So I coded all the emoji and cow emoji, and this is the incomplete table. And as you can see, there's been actually a lot of research on which emoji people use, and this is very, very different from studies on both the global most common emoji and the most common emoji used by young Japanese people, as all of these sweat emoji and also the use of the exclamation marks and the question marks as emoji rather than just something that you type are very much key to this practice specifically and associated with these kind of old men. Uh, Especially the sweat marks were used because one part of the practice is after you say something like, hey, going out with sushi was fun. Next time I want to eat you. Haha. They'll say things like nan chatte, which is like a Japanese lame way of saying like just joking, haha, not unless it's not a joke. Oh no, okay, yeah, it's a joke. And they put the sweat marks there to kind of emphasize that sort of cringe, which made it all kind of part of the practice. So this is like a language style which only exists on the internet, but fortunately, because we have access to the internet, I was able to kind of scoop this actually, as my research paper came out on this far before a lot of Japanese um, various things blew up and started talking about this, and indeed before the name changed to Ojisan Kolbun. So you can watch these kind of play phenomenon happening in real time. Whereas, for instance, prior research on like Garumoji often was decades later, and people had to kind of sift through old stuff, and the people that they wanted to talk to, people who were still doing this practice, were mostly gone. Another research project I did kind of recently was one called Yokomoji Arerigi, where somebody asked me, they invited me to, because I'm kind of like a script guy, to participate in a special issue on katakana. And I was like, that sounds great, but I don't have a research project in mind. So I was spending all this time just thinking about, okay, what can I do? And this is what I mentioned earlier about thinking, like trying to find data and not. Because I went onto Twitter and typed katakana and tried to see if I could find discourse, and just wasn't enough of it. But through constantly going on to all these different websites, all these different things, looking for attitudes towards katakana or something I could talk about with katakana, something new. Interviews aren't going to work. Twitter had too many hits. TikTok, etc., don't really have videos on this. Young people aren't like making TikTok videos about their feelings about katakana. So fortunately, though, I found a major Japanese forum, Girls Channel. It's well known. I've used it for research before. It's been used quite a lot for research. It's very, very, very popular with certain group. It's not like I don't present this as representative of the entirety of Japan, but it is enough to make like here's some of the discourse that we will see when we investigate this phenomenon. And I typed in katakana, and lo and behold, there were a large number of hits. And such as here, people talking about people whose names are in katakana, or here people complaining about the use of various words that are written in katakana during the corona pandemic. All this data was very, very interesting and very useful. Additionally, I checked out Yahoo Chiabukuro just to see, typed in katakana, and lo and behold, I found a lot of discussion of katakana as well. So there you go. I was like, okay, I found some data online. I can actually do this. And indeed, while interviews might have been more in depth, I got way, way more data than I would have been able to for interviews because it ended up being hundreds and hundreds of posts about people complaining about katakana and words written in katakana. And then also I decided to add some English data to kind of round things out. And so I went on Reddit and our Japanese, lo and behold, there's discussions of katakana, very, very different ones, but I thought it'd be a nice little counterpoint to see if the Japanese learners discussing katakana had any kind of overlap with what the Japanese people discussing katakana were discussing, and whether or not that was kind of creating gaps in the knowledge that these learners had. So all in all, I took 10 threads from Girls Channel. There are 250 relevant comments. I had to read way more than that about katakana words and 282 about katakana names. Chiabukuro had 15 threads, 141 total comments. And Reddit had 28 threads with 599 comments about katakana and 203 comments that were people trying to explain this to other users. And again, I popped all this into Zotero and I used coding very actively to like look for themes and what's coming up. And I found things like, for instance, these kind of quotes. These are from the Japanese data, looking at why people don't like katakana. And you can see people talking about cow emoji and katakana being put together, being very, very cringe, which actually links back to the Ojisan gokko thing we saw earlier, right? People saying that you're not using language correctly on the internet. People saying that katakana is used for people to like trying to show off that they're cool or making things vague. There's a lot of kind of nationalism in there, and that people saying that say it in Japanese, which of course like if a word is being used by Japanese people, that is Japanese. Like words in katakana are Japanese, but this belief that they're not Japanese words, right? So say it in Japanese, don't say it in a loan word. That's not Japanese. Japanese is different. Um, People saying that katakana users look stupid, or people saying that it's associated with certain eras. A lot of people saying that like the Showa era people like katakana. Um, Noted that old men love gairaigo. And again, people saying that intelligent people use Japanese in Japanese conversations and English in English conversations. So this idea that languages don't share, right, or that that they're separate, this kind of nationalistic approach comes up in that kind of data as well. You can also see quotes here like people saying that they want to use these words because they're new and they want to show off, or that people who use katakana go are terrible at their jobs. Again, showa. And this idea of like, oh, I know this word, therefore I'm special. This sort of manzoku-kan also appearing. There's also quotes like this where people actually, this is one of my favorite data pieces from this study, that the person is actually breaking down every single script type by different groups of people in Japan. Like older men use katakana, older women use hiragana, delinquents use kanji, so old men use katakana. And there were arguments too, which was very interesting because not treating these forums as just a unified body was very, very important. As in this interaction where somebody says like, oh, people at my work use the word resume, and that's like putting on airs. And then they're replied to by somebody who says working at a place where resume is considered like a pretentious word is sounds awful. So fighting about like which words are actually new, which words are rare, etc. And also people here like this is another fun comment where everyone was complaining about katakana and it's saying it was used by like old people, and someone said like, actually, we're all old people on Girls Channel. We're all a bunch of old ladies. So just have, don't worry about it. Just have fun. And they use katakana intentionally for Japanese words in their own speech to kind of jokingly joke and mock the people that are getting upset about this kind of katakana use. And indeed, some links to the social users as well, such as this comment where people says, you know, it's not the katakana you hate, but the people that use them. Removing the language from the abstract and putting it into the issue of the actual people, divides between Japanese society based on their language choices. Use of katakana for names was also quite interesting, as a lot of people said it was okay for hafu or older people. So there are also quotes like for a normal Japanese person. So again, what is normal? This belief that like a Japanese person who is normal should have a name that's not in katakana, unless they're older. Grandmotherly image. And actually, this is true. There is data showing that katakana names were a boom and then decreased. So the people that have them now are tend to be kind of older. As you know, as the bottom comment says, there was a time when katakana names were a fad. But let's talk about the English data. Like, are people on Reddit aware at all of this kind of debate? Are they aware at all that katakana is being used in ways not just to like change the meaning of things, but also to divide social groups and the idea that certain people use katakana in different ways or katakana words in different ways? Well, the answer is kind of no. Although I will say that our Japanese did seem to be fairly knowledgeable about some reasons why Japanese words are written in katakana sometimes. One reason is just because, and no, really, that is a real reason. One of my most popular videos talks about it. I'll pop a link in the description to this one. One is just like not remembering the kanji, literacy issues of spacing, avoiding kanji that most readers don't know. That's all true. Emphasis, yes, katakana is used for emphasis. Some gyongo, gitaigo, the onomatopoeia, mimetic words are written in katakana. That's also true. Vibes or katakana produced images, yes. And some social understandings of katakana use. For instance, this is a chart showing how people explained the various forms on Reddit. And as you can see, emphasis was very, very key. So they said like some animal plant names, style, generic, these are all being noted. And there are people saying there's going to be marked speech. So some people are saying like, yeah, look, katakana marks speech and it represents kind of sound changes. But when you look at the data for how these are described, mostly it's just people saying that katakana has a cool effect or like it's emotionless. Some were saying it's masculine or casual or serious, high tech, it's scary. So there's a range of here, but they're very much restricted to the kind of affective rather than any kind of social issues. Nobody was saying like some people use katakana because of their generation, or some people use katakana because they're in a social group that uses it, or some people don't use katakana because they don't want to be associated with that. That sort of information is lacking, and obviously is something that learners need to know before they put a bunch of katakana in their text because they think it looks cool, 37.5%, and end up looking like a sketchy old man. I've also then studied a more recent project that is currently in development on something called Kurimango, which is a language that has been developed and is highly used online. Although the person you look at here, Alan Sama, does use it in speech as well, but it's very much associated with the internet. And I'm working with another researcher on trying to understand this kind of phenomenon. Again, using digital methods, looking at use of it on Twitter, as well as in combination with a more traditional method of a survey of Kuriman, who are fans of Alan and people who use this Kurimango language. This is major. Like it's there are a lot of people that don't know about this, don't know about Alan Sama, but like here is a trending Z generation chart, and number two under influencer is Alan Sama. Like Alan Sama has influence. They are not somebody that I think could ever make it on like morning TV because they are very, very vulgar in their style intentionally. But precisely for that reason, they do have a hugely passionate fan base. And there's no question that they're doing something which is quite unique, especially in terms of the language that they use. So Alan, for instance, tweets like this. I've highlighted a few things, but there's a lot of things we could talk about. But like just their use of anta as like a second person pronoun has it's in katakana. It has a shrunk down ah and then a half width n and then a full width ta. This of course obviously takes a lot of time to type out. They use zamasu in katakana, and you can see kiro being used for kedo. So that's a text marker in Japanese that is used for like kilogram, but they're using it to mean like kedo, like but. Aru, again, here you can see here is used for aru, right? Gekimazu, right? Gekimazui, extremely gross. Utori, that's just a word, but like you can see they've shrunk the u and the small tsu. Itsumo has a small e in front of it. It's a very, very complicated style that has spread, of course, through Alan's use of it and gone throughout the population. There's also, of course, a lot of emoji that are involved, which are again very, very distinct from the emoji being used in general kind of Japanese, but that is again part of the style, the kind of uniqueness of it. And Alan does use this. Alan Sama does use this in speech a little bit. Indeed, when they say watakushi, they subtitle it. Alan's first person pronoun is watakushi with a small wa, which is it is what it is. But again, it is very much highly in online kind of form. And if you look though, people ask about these sort of forms. Like the use of kiro to mean kedo predates Alan Sama. I found uses that go before Alan was active as a taranto. But if you look on Yahoo Chiebukuro, there's a lot of people asking like, where is this form from? And everyone says, oh, it's Alan Sama. And so it's very much associated with them now. And their fans use it, right? But yeah, sorry, this is an example from 2001, which very much predates Alan. But it doesn't really matter where it comes from, matters who is popularizing it. And the community has also started developing their own kind of forms of Kurimango, developing it beyond Alan Sama's original intents, like Y and Na, these kind of various forms. It has its own entry on the Pixiv dictionary. And there are things like this R taxi. This is yatakushi, which is a pronoun, a first person pronoun used by fans of Aran Sama. They developed it by themselves as kind of their own little pronoun, so not to just borrow Alan's own uses. But we did a digital survey to ask people about, their fandom, people fans of this person, and looking at why they use this and how they began using it. And this was a digital survey. So it is a survey still, but it is a digital one, and it's one that we were only able to create because we did download a number of posts by Kuriman, by fans of Alan Sama, to understand kind of what they were doing so we could ask the correct questions. One of the simple ones, like we're still going through this data, so this is very, very tentative, but I just want to show some kind of key, easy to digest findings. And one of the simple ones is that it's very, very clear that it's Alan Sama themselves that remains the first thing that people encounter in learning this style. For instance, you can see 36% of people stating that they first encountered Kurimango via Alan's YouTube or on TV. 44%, so the highest, noting that it is via their Twitter account, and only 1% saying it's via kind of an article. Then we asked them, why do fans of Alan use Kurimango? And this got they were able to give more than one answer here, so that's why it's more than 100%. But as you can see, the highest number, close to 80%, are people stating that it's Oshikatsu for Alan. So it connects them to Alan Sama. That's like the number one reason. So it is a fun online play, but it wouldn't really exist without this person at the top that it kind of links them to. On top of that, though, it does, make the fan community get together. That's 57%. And also, people said they felt kind of a sense of superiority for it at 33%. 36% found it a way to kind of relieve stress. But 61%, so the second highest actually, said that it's a way for them to say things that they are not normally able to say. So this very, very odd style, this Kuribango, actually sort of adds a new register into Japanese. Like English speakers often perhaps think that Japanese is very diverse in the way you can say things, and it certainly is. You have keigo, you have teinego, you have casual forms, but even within all this variety, people are still looking for more variety. As Kurimango for these users provides them with a new avenue that all the other avenues don't allow them to do. But when we ask them a more open-ended question of like, do you feel different when you're using this form? We found people saying like, yeah, lets me come out with my honne, right? I can say what I feel. I can say what I mean more easily. And stating that things that are hard to say normally, I can say them easily, right? I can say things clearly, hakkiri, right? Mono ga iete. And also, somebody saying at the bottom that they're normally kind of shy, but when they're using this language form, they feel that they're a bit brighter, right? And they change into somebody different. So this language style is actually offering them not only a way to connect to their bias, it's not only like an oshikatsu, it also gives them a new aspect of their identity that they can mobilize in their day-to-day life, even if it's restricted to certain kind of areas. So all in all, then, what's the point of this? Well, hopefully it's that online data sources are important, but do require a lot of thought into how to do the actual study because you need to make sure you can get access to the population. We could get access to Kuriman on Twitter. Could we get access to other people that are not as part of a dedicated fandom? Not sure. And we have to be careful, of course, with these online sources in terms of what we can say. I can't say when I use one forum or two forums to write a research paper, I cannot say this is how all Japanese people think. But if those forums have like 600 plus comments on the topic I'm interested in, I can say these are some large discourse parts that do circulate in Japan, especially if the forum is ones like Girls Channel, which is a very, very large and very popular forum, right? This isn't like obscure tiny group forum. These are there. But we have to be very, very cautious in not only our research ethics, but most importantly, our research design. And then, of course, what we claim the way we design our research and the data that we get from our research vastly affects, excuse me, what we can claim. And as long as we make our claims recognizing that, we can use the online sources for some really excellent data and really interesting data about Japanese that does provide insights into the language that we would not be able to get otherwise. But of course, this does not supplant the traditional data, and traditional research methods combined with these digital methods can produce really effective studies, right? You can get the data online that allows you to design an effective interview. You can do the interview, which gets you insight into something which you can then go and observe online and understand better. They can work together very, very well. But as with all research, it requires very effective design and also lots of hedging, I guess. But being very clear about what you're actually studying and what you've actually uncovered and making sure you're connecting that to broader discussions so that this online research, this online forums do bring us back to the bigger questions, which is how does language work? How do people understand language, etc. So thank you very much for this listening to this lecture. I hope you enjoyed this traditional academic content on your YouTube channel. And again, if you have questions, pop them in the comments and I will answer them as though you were part of the actual lecture. Thank you and goodbye.